Welcome back, Mr. Goodberry. The First Star Logistics studio is fully equipped and ready to record.
Welcome back to Bengals On The Brain, presented by my friends at First Star Logistics. I'm your host, Joe Goodberry, and you'll probably be watching this on July 1st of 2025, which will be our third season together between the partnership, myself, and the people at First Star Logistics, which will be the longest, once we complete season 3, will be the longest I've been with one company over my 17 years of making Bengals and football content in general. I've bounced around so much. The Athletic for 2.5 years. COVID ended that one. Cincy Jungle for 3 years. So, I'd be matching that. I almost made it fully 3 years with Cincy Jungle back in the day. Back in the day, 2009, 10, and 11, I want to say that was. So happy to be starting season 3, season 17 for me making content for you guys, which is the bulk of the 25 years we're reviewing in this series of the 25-year team 2025. You had to have played or appeared in 25 Bengals games. We've done the offense already. It's pretty stacked. And there's a bunch of guys from the current roster on the 25-year team, which is a reason why they won 9 games with such a terrible defense last year. I don't know how many guys we're going to get from the current team on the defensive side as we start on that one today. But there is at least one guy, and we're starting with the defensive line. And we're starting with a guy that's holding out currently, and hopefully that deal gets done. Let's dive into the 25-year defensive line, where I think we got at least one Hall of Famer in there, and then a bunch of Ring of Honor guys, in my opinion. One. Starting off at right defensive end, we'll go right to left here. I've got right defensive end listed, defensive tackle, nose tackle, and then left defensive end. So as a defensive line, building out the depth chart. If you're new to this and you want to go, you're going to go back to the offense later. We are building the team, the 53-man roster. So we've got some honorable mentions between all of these guys, and we have some cuts to make, and that's what you'll see in the gray here. So starting just at right defensive end, where the Bengals are pretty good there. I've got as DN number 1, Trey Hendrickson. And obviously, 4 years with the Bengals, 4 Pro Bowls, absolute sack king. The best pass rusher, just pure pass rusher, I think they've probably ever had. And he's not the best versus the run. We know that. He's not the most stout guy in terms of defending at the point of attack. But what he is an elite athlete with great moves, great power. He blacks out the cone, blackout Trey. He just goes through guys' chests, can run through you, can run around you. Watching him on tape is a pleasure every week because I'm watching a guy with an elite get off that people don't. There was a while there where I had to tell people like this is an elite athlete. You had to show his combine performances and things like that. And then I think people have started to recognize that you have to be an elite athlete to be a really good defensive end, or especially as a pass rusher. And when you see him swipe and then just bend around the arc as quickly as he does, I think people recognize it and go, oh yeah. And then, or if he's looping around and chasing down Lamar Jackson, you're like, yeah, Trey is fast. And then he comes right back with a bull rush right through someone's chest, lifts their arms up, and works underneath and gets in for the sack there very quickly, or pulls a guy directly over and puts him on his butt. And you go, he's got elite strength. He's got elite strength, athleticism, hand usage. I hope they keep him. I hope they keep him for the next few years because not only I think he's Ring of Honor candidate already. 4 years. Let's see, should play 5 years at the very least with the Bengals. If you can get him to 6, 7, 8 years, I think for sure he'll be in the conversation of top 15 Bengals of all time at that rate. I haven't done the numbers and tried to see where he would stack up in the greatest 100 Bengals because I did this with guys that were near the end of their cycle, the Tyler Boyds, the at the time Joe Mixon, stuff like when I did this last year. And those guys were all, like Boyd was at the end, Mixon was somewhere in the 20s or early 30s. And then I didn't do Trey, but now after another year of 17 and a half sacks, second in defensive player of the year, all pro, Pro Bowl, it's really going to boost him. I think a couple more good years and he would be one of the best defensive players we've ever had. Speaking of Justin Smith, right after him, you could argue Justin Smith should be starting on this defensive line, and I would not disagree. I mean, we're talking about one of the best players of the early 2000s in the entire NFL. I think when PFF first started, 2006 or 7, 8, one of those years, I know they started in 06, but one of those years he won Defensive Player of the Year for the 49ers from PFF. And if you look at Justin Smith's numbers with the Bengals and with the 49ers, now he left the Bengals after, like, I think a lot of people are saying, like, you can't pay that guy. I don't think he wanted to stay, but you can't pay that guy that's getting 7 sacks a year. This is before the advanced stuff that showed like how much of an impact this guy was having. The pressures, the killed run plays, he was just a pain in the butt for everyone to block. And there wasn't a lot of talent around him. He got a couple of those years with Marvin Lewis as the defense was starting to get assembled. And I think Justin Smith would have been a Ring of Honor player for the Bengals had he finished his career and matched what he did this first 7 years, I think it was, with the Bengals, what he did with the Niners. His numbers are exactly the same amount of sacks, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, tackles, but yet he made Pro Bowls with the Niners. That's the story of the Bengals, is it not? We deal with that all the time, guys not getting the recognition. I think Justin Smith did not get the recognition, and he would play on this defensive line. So that's the thing, right? As we were going through like the offensive line, it created a lot of debate in the comments where people were like, oh, I would start this guy or I would start that guy. We didn't have so much of that debate at quarterback and wide receiver or tight end because all of those guys would play at some point, right? You'd rotate receivers, running backs, and even tight ends if you're going out there 2, 3 tight ends, 3 wide receivers. Same with defensive end. Like if you wanted to put Justin Smith out there for early down run defense and then bring in Trey Hendrickson on third downs to rush the passer, you would be incredibly dominant. I mean, the combination of the two, it'd be like having Reggie White, Bruce Smith, the best guys of all time at that spot. Justin Smith was a power player, strong player, didn't always have the best technique, I think, early in his career for sure. But he ended up like later in his career, when you're at year 8, 9, 10, and there, I remember he was with the Niners and with Aldon Smith, if you remember him, and they were doing a lot of looping and stunning at that time. And Smith would go in and grab the tackle and the guard, and he was so strong he could hold both of them while Aldon Smith would loop around and get the sack. And you'd see the tackle like flailing, like trying to get out of there. Illegal. You're not supposed to do that. But because he was so strong, he could hold them inside where he wasn't reaching out and grabbing these guys. He had them both locked in, and the ref wouldn't call it because it didn't look like a blatant hold. But he was a very, very strong dude, country strong dude. And I think you can move him up and down this defensive line. Like you can see this whole line here. To me, I would have Trey, Geno Atkins, Justin Smith, Carlos Dunlap as your pass rushers. Kick Justin Smith into defensive tackle. That's what he did a bunch. He played primarily right, but he played a lot of left end and could slide in and play defensive tackle. When he went to the Niners in their 3-4, you saw him play a lot of inside. So he can do it, and that would be an incredibly crazy defensive line to send at people. Honestly, it'd be a great line as a pass rusher in terms of not just the Bengals, talking about the entire 32-team landscape the last 25 years. I think that would stack up with a lot. Michael Johnson is making this roster. Michael Johnson, 6'7". There was times he was 250, 240, I want to say. At his rookie year, 243. I think it showed it on Hard Knocks. I think it was Hard Knocks. And he was playing linebacker early, and he had to get his weight up. And I think he ended up about 275 or so. And Michael Johnson was super long. He was athletic but stiff because he was so long, but just absolutely chiseled and cut up. One of their best character players they've ever had. He was a captain for the Bengals. I think Justin Smith and Michael Johnson were both captains at one point. I know Michael Johnson was for sure. I remember Justin Smith being that. But Johnson, character-wise, one of the best players I've ever had. I think he was nominated for their Walter Payton Man of the Year and won their personal team Man of the Year for the Bengals. Johnson, though, could bat passes at a high rate. He was a very good tackler because I think that length, he would hold as or be held, but he would be engaged with the offensive tackle, and he could reach out with his long arms and wrap running backs up as they're going by him. It was very hard. When it was Johnson and Dunlap at both at end, and we would have some formations where or defensive packages where they're both out there. That length at DN was crazy. And this was during like the boom of young quarterbacks that can move. I always think of the game versus, and this will go into Carlos Dunlap as well, the game versus Robert Griffin. Yeah, I think it was Robert Griffin versus the at the time the Washington Redskins, now Commanders, where they're trying to run option stuff and get Griffin out of the pocket, and they couldn't because these guys were so long. They could cover so much ground. They could really play two gaps just by standing there and putting their arms out, that it made it very hard to run the read option on them. And it did not work. And they absolutely smoked RG3 multiple times. But Michael Johnson, one of his best moments, I think, is in that Packers game. Do you remember that one where it was like 4th and 1, Packers are going for it? He has a batted pass earlier in that drive, and then 4th and 1, he helps make the tackle for a loss. Ball comes out. I think Terrence Newman picks it up. Reggie Nelson to Terrence Newman, maybe. But huge play at the time, if you remember that one from about 2012 or in that range. In that era, for sure. Michael Johnson was a good player for them. He made our top 100 greatest Bengals of all time. Wasn't high on the list, meaning top 35 or so. Not a Ring of Honor type guy, but someone that definitely should not be forgotten, mostly for his character, unique build, and being a 3rd round pick, a very successful. We would take a 3rd round Michael Johnson right now, no doubt about it, on this roster. The guy who didn't make the cut, that should also probably be remembered, and is probably one of their best pure pass rushers on this list, is Carl Lawson. And he was a 4th round pick. So we've got some guys here. With Trey Hendrickson 3rd, Michael Johnson 3rd, Carl Lawson 4th. Lawson never became a high-end sack guy. He dealt with injuries at Auburn. He dealt with injuries in the NFL. And I think that's probably what ultimately held him back. Otherwise, we're talking about a shorter, stockier type pass rusher. Not the most agile guy, but his get off was good. His power was elite, and his moves were elite. He had a bag of tricks that he could go to. His best was his long arm stab power move, where he would get into the chest. He could lift big linemen up and displace them easily and discard them, get to the quarterback. I kind of hesitated when I said discard because I think that was one of his issues. He wasn't the longest guy. So there would be times he would create a ton of pressures without turning them into sacks. Ultimately, he left in free agency, went to the Jets, had injuries there. Now he's bounced around as like a 4th, 5th defensive end pass rush specialist. He had a solid year last year, actually, for the Cowboys. And I don't know, did he resign there or is he still out there? Because I would take him currently, but they need to give the young guys reps on this current 2025 team. So I understand why they wouldn't. But for us, Lawson's not going to make the team. These other guys are just better, more impactful, longer careers with the Bengals, more well-rounded. You just see when we get to the left defensive end guys. But Lawson should be remembered as one of their better pass rushers, especially over the last 15 years or so. When we're cutting out the Justin Smiths, and I guess most of these guys were recent. It's interesting now that I'm looking at it. But Carl Lawson, just as a pure pass rusher, he wasn't good against the run either. Picking up Trey Hendrickson there, but he could. His highlights were very, very good. Moving into defensive tackle, and this is, if you're ever wondering the difference between defensive tackle, nose tackle are your bigger guys. You're taking on the 2 blocks. You're going to 2 gap if you can. You're controlling the point of attack. Your defensive tackles, your 3 tech, your under tackles are the guys that are going to have the burst, have the pass rush, can get upfield, right? Can make plays that way. At defensive tackle, obviously DT number 1 is Geno Atkins. Should be a Hall of Famer. I think he's a top 5 player in Bengals history. I think he's probably the best defensive player in Bengals history. And yes, I know Lamar Parrish is now not Lamar Parrish. Sorry, Ken Riley. Lamar Parrish should be in the Hall of Fame. Should be in the Bengals Ring of Honor. How we vote for him this year. I don't know if we talked about that ever. If we ever talked about the Ring of Honor on the show. Ken Riley is in the Hall of Fame. I understand that. I think Geno Atkins has the best shot of any of their guys from the last 25 years, maybe on this roster. I think Willie Anderson, because he's knocking on the door right now, is legitimately the best shot. But after he gets in, even over Andrew Whitworth, I think Geno Atkins, guys don't make the Pro Bowl that many years in a row, that often, and not make the Hall of Fame. Check defensive tackles that have 8 Pro Bowls and find how many 6+ defensive tackle Pro Bowls are in the Hall of Fame. Geno Atkins was elite athlete with this is newer. I mean, you had guys like John Randall and Leroy Glover and Warren Sapp that were 6'1" or lower, 290. When everyone wanted these 6'4", 6'5" defensive tackles that were 320 plus, you had random spot appearances by these small defensive tackles that could really rush the passer. And what the size did, Geno Atkins was in that mold of the 6'1", 290. What that gave you was natural leverage. And especially inside, if I'm lower than you are, it is tough to block. It is tough to block that guy. It is tough to block the guy with the natural leverage. And so with natural leverage and elite athleticism, Geno Atkins also had unreal power, natural raw power. You mix that get off with that athleticism and the leverage and the power, he was incredible. He was so good. And you can't underrate Geno Atkins. You can't overrate him either. You have to be clear on this. And I try to be clear because when I think about like the 17 years of watching Bengals football from a semi-professional level of trying to analyze everything I can, of watching every single game multiple times, watching film multiple times, Geno Atkins is the best player I watched in a Bengals uniform. I think he's that good. I can't say enough about how good he was. And character-wise, I mean, it's a guy who never made any trouble at all and was professional through and through. Makes his defensive line. Makes his defense. Probably completes it. Without Geno on this defense, I feel much like, still would like an interior pass rusher. He is the centerpiece, in my opinion. Next, you could argue between the two of these guys, John Thornton and B.J. Hill, and I'll put them together. B.J., bigger moments, probably better seasons. He's been pretty consistent in his 4 years with the Bengals. But the better seasons are the playoff runs he had, obviously, and he had big playoff moments, Super Bowl moments. If you want to put B.J. Hill number 2, I would get it completely. John Thornton was one of the big free agent signings the Bengals had when Marvin Lewis came here and was like, I need to revamp. I need to get new guys in here. And Thornton came over from the Titans. He wore 97 as well. That's funny, before Geno Atkins. He was a solid athlete that could rush the passer, but also play the run as well. Good character guy. I believe he was a captain also. We may have all captains here. B.J. Hill definitely was. Last year, I think he was. You've got two guys here that I think not the greatest players. They're more on I'm trying to think of what level they're on here. Are they on a Sam Hubbard level or are they on a Michael Johnson level? They're in between that. I think B.J. Hill, now that he extended and he's going to be in Cincinnati for 7 years, we'll see, maybe 6 years, he's going to make the top 100 Bengals of all time. John Thornton did as well. I think he was in the 80s. Doma Tapeko did for sure. He was in the top 35, I want to say. Sam Hubbard will. He'll be in probably the 70s or 60s. So I think they're in between that. What kind of player are they? What level player are they? They're not guys that, like, if I get into a pass rush situation, I need 2 defensive tackles out there. Would I have Geno Atkins, B.J. Hill, or John Thornton? Maybe. But I also think they're better at DN, where I would rather kick Michael Johnson or Justin Smith inside over a John Thornton or a B.J. Hill. But both guys valuable, like both guys. This shows the gap, though. I think you have a solid C+ player for both of those. Maybe B.J. Hill's a B-, and then Geno Atkins is an A+ player. Tony Williams, Oliver Gibson, 2 guys you may not know, early 2000s guys, right on the cusp of 25 years, that had good years for the Bengals for the short time they were here. Both were on bad defenses. The teams were not good from 2000 to 2003, right? But both were solid players. I remember playing Madden as a kid at that time because if it was 2000, I was 13 years old. I was born in 87. Playing a lot of Madden at that time. And Tony Williams and Oliver Gibson were in the high to mid 80s, 84, 86 guys. They were solid defenders at that time. Both could, I think Tony Williams could play some nose too. I think Gibson did. Bengals did some 3-4 Dick LeBeau stuff, so they moved all across the defensive line with fire zones, blitzes and two gapping, allowing everyone else to make the plays. But they did have a couple good years each as well, not making the roster here, but just being honorable mention. Thought I should bring their names up. At nose tackle, this could be an argument. I think between DJ Reader and Domata Peko, pick your poison there, which one you like. We're going to keep 5 defensive tackles in total. We're going to keep 5 defensive ends in total, 10 defensive linemen. But to me, DJ Reader, why I'm giving him the nod over Domata Peko. We're talking about 2 guys that played nose tackle at a high level, as high as you can for nose tackle. It's an underrated position. It gets overlooked throughout the league. It gets overlooked by fans. But DJ Reader, to me, had the higher upside, higher flash plays, higher levels of dominance. Domata Peko was more consistently healthy, available, team captain. I think both these guys, again, team captains. We're getting a lot of team captains. Being a good player often means, hey, if you're a young guy, not only these guys have great character, good players. If you're a good player without the great character, take it from this list here. You got a lot of high character players making this list. But Domata Peko was steady, durable, played forever in the NFL. He just did not have the high-end flash plays. He could hold his ground and hold on to 2 guys all day long. Reader could hold on to 2 guys and toss one to the ground, into the dirt, maybe even bury him 6 foot deep and make a play, which to me is a difference. I thought you got more flash, more splash plays from DJ Reader than you got Domata Peko. But those are 2 good guys. Imagine we get into a run situation. We got to put Reader and Peko out there. You could have a lot of fun. And also, I want to note here that when the Bengals tried to go from Domata Peko pretty much to DJ Reader and tried to get that upgrade, there was a couple year gap there, where they had Andrew Billings, who you see right below. But the idea and the hope was, man, you're putting Geno Atkins next to DJ Reader for a couple years here. You can really keep Atkins' career going. He ended up having that shoulder injury, and we never really saw Atkins again. It was such a shame the way his career ended off, because a couple more good years, I think he'd have been a Hall of Fame lock, a 100% lock, and instead he's like a 90-something percenter. But Reader and Atkins would be a blast together, because Reader commanded double teams, and so did Atkins, and you're not going to be able to do both. But in this case, getting them together is fulfilling something we never got to see. And we'll never get to see it, actually, because this isn't real. I'm losing my thought here. Andrew Billings, though, not making the roster. And this, I thought Billings, he was a guy, he was one of our draft crushes, if you go back that far. I'm trying to remember what year that was, 2016 or so. But there was some talk of him being a first rounder, maybe, definitely a second rounder. He goes in the 4th round. He had a knee issue. He needed microfracture surgery, if I remember correctly, to repair meniscus his rookie season. But he was a solid. Now he's a 6'1" nose tackle, and that hurt him at times. But his power and his athleticism, straight line athleticism, were pretty good. His power was really good. That leverage at 6'1" really stood out. But it caused him vision issues, I think, at times, because he wasn't tall enough. Typically, you want your nose tackle, especially 2 gappers, to have a little bit of height so they can lock these guys out and play both gaps. Billings did not have that. And he spent his 4 years and then moved on in the NFL. And for 3 of those years, I was like, man, and he was like a 20-year-old prospect coming out too. So there was a lot of hope for him to develop into that. And then around year 5, 6, 7 in the NFL, it's like, oh, he's a good player. And he's still playing, and he's still a solid guy. I think he plays for the Bears now. Worth a mention here, because if one of these, like if there is a practice squad, we never really established if there was a practice squad for this project here, but if there was, and I had to call up Andrew Billings to replace an injured Peko or Reader, I think I'd be fine. I think he'd be able to play. He wouldn't be as impactful as these top guys, but he can play on this team, and I wouldn't have an issue. Moving on to left defensive end to wrap up this defensive line, Carlos Dunlap. And it's funny because we start with Trey Hendrickson when we talk about this list, and he's going through his holdout now, and he's requested a trade for the 2nd year in a row. And Dunlap had to do the same to leave Cincinnati. And when Lou Anarumo came in, they clearly butted heads and did not agree on the approach. And Dunlap forced his way out and did what he had to do and be as loud as possible. And because the Bengals aren't just going to trade you, right? We've seen it before. Carson Palmer's on this list, right? Chad Johnson's on this list. There's guys that the Bengals have traded away that are on this list. There are plenty of guys that Corey Dillon's also on here. There are plenty of guys. Joe Mixon. Wow, they're all. I don't want to keep going. How many guys have they traded away that are on here? But there are plenty of guys that left probably unhappy. DJ Reader left unhappy, right? Justin Smith probably left unhappy. Carlos Dunlap did as well. But during his career, he was very good for the Bengals. He was a high impact player versus the run as a pass rusher. And we're talking about a guy again who's 6'6", 285, could bend at that size, crazy agility. Like I talk about Michael Johnson being the size and couldn't bend. It was different for Carlos Dunlap. He wasn't absolutely shredded the way Johnson was. He was bigger, thicker, more powerful, and just had surprising build-up speed and agility to get around the edge. His flashes, his high-end plays, you'd go, man, why can't he do that more often? I think there was frustration around Dunlap because he wasn't always impactful, because he would pick and choose his spots. Like, okay, third down, I got to make a play. And he would. And you go, dude, we need this all the time. But when you watch it and go back and look at his numbers, he's one of the better edge defenders of this generation, this last generation. He just retired, ended up leaving and getting a Super Bowl ring with the Chiefs after being traded to Seattle. But Dunlap reaches 100 sacks in his career. That's a plateau. I don't think any of these other guys on this list have that or will have that. And despite the effort issues, he racked up a ton of numbers. Like, we can say, oh, he didn't put in the most effort, right? His tackles, his pressures, his forced fumbles, his fumble recoveries, his sacks, obviously, all reach a plateau that most guys don't get to. So you're telling me with not even giving all that effort, right? If this is what people don't like about him, because I've heard this, clearly was still fantastic, right? We can't deny that. And then you get to the batted passes. And at the time, J.J. Watt's winning Defensive Player of the Year because he bats 15 passes. Carlos Dunlap is right there batting 12 passes. And the next guy on the list has 3. Like, he was an elite player at getting up and knocking that ball down. And there were times where coaches told him not to do it. And like, why? You're killing a play. You're causing interceptions. A lot of his batted passes ended up being picked off by other players. Carlos Dunlap, to me, was a high impact player for the plays that you felt like he was caring and giving it his all. His rate was incredibly high. So on a D line with DJ Reader would have made Dunlap better. On a D line he had Atkins, obviously, so those two fed off each other a ton. But with try hard guys and psychos on the D line like Trey Hendrickson as well, Justin Smith, you might get an absolute. That might bleed into Dunlap's game and get him going at all times. And the guy behind him would be Sam Hubbard, who actually, this is how it happened. As Dunlap was a few years into his career, the Bengals drafted Sam Hubbard, and Hubbard played and rotated in and kicked inside. And I think they comboed up for, I think Hubbard was there when Michael Johnson and Carl Lawson were there. Yeah, because the Hubbard rookie game against the Dolphins where I don't know, does he pick that pass off or is it a fumble return for a touchdown? You know what game I'm talking about? Really close game. Johnson's on that line, Carl Lawson's on that line, Geno Atkins is on that line, and Carlos Dunlap is on it. And that's crazy to look at and say how good they were. But Hubbard never turned into a great pass rusher. He would get you 6 sacks a year. He would get you 45 pressures as well. But his run defense was as good as anyone. His effort plays, he became a team captain, heart and soul. Cincinnati's own, right? Everyone would go crazy. He's coming out. He deserves a spot on this list. And if you have to have active and inactive players, Hubbard may be inactive. He and John Thornton or BJ Hill, and you may only go with 8 out of the 10 year guys active, and Hubbard may not. But if someone goes down, he's got a lot of versatility and can play a lot for you without being that dominant pass rusher. We've got so many pass rushers on the edge spot. We need one guy that can be a high-end run defender, even though Justin Smith and Carlos Dunlap were very good against the run. Guys who did not make the list, did not make the cut. Robert Geathers, Wallace Gilberry. Two, again, very valuable players. Geathers played for a long time with the Bengals. He was there at the end of his career when Dunlap was coming in. So a lot of these guys cross over a little bit. But Geathers was a bigger D-end without the high-end athleticism, but was a sneaky athlete. He's got some interceptions. They would drop him into coverage. He would make some diving tackles that you'd be like, man, all right, you're getting a little more athletic than I thought, Robert Geathers. But he could kick inside and rush from defensive tackle. You can move him right end, left end. You can move him all around. That versatility was really key for him. I believe he was a team captain as well. So we got a lot of these guys. And he's worth an honorable mention. I think Geathers was in the 90s of our top 100 Bengals of all time, or just missed the cut, but he was really close. And then Wallace Gilberry. We could use a Wallace Gilberry right now in Cincinnati, for sure. And he would be an impact player. Gilberry was a guy who was cut by the Chiefs, and I think this was like week 2, 3, or 4, early season when the Bengals claimed him and picked him up. And I remember seeing his flashes in preseason and thinking, like, that guy can play. And then he ended up being a pretty solid impact player for the Bengals for those early 2010 teams, the 11 through 15 teams, where Gilberry was a guy that would kick inside, play defensive tackle in nickel situations, and was big enough to defend the run, but athletic enough to rush the passer from inside, would loop and stunt and just high effort, move them all around, a versatile piece. I will never say no to those guys. It's not just because his name sounds like mine at times. Wallace Gilberry was an impact player, and I'll take him on this team any day of the week. So 10 guys there on the defensive line. Let me know where I went wrong. Who would you start? Who would you slide down the depth chart maybe? Any of those guys, honorable mention, you think should have made the roster? Anyone on the roster you would have cut? Anyone I'm forgetting as well? So far on the offense, nobody said I forgot anyone, which is good. Defense probably could be a little bit more debatable on defense and defensive line. I think when we get to like corner and safety, there may be some debates. I think linebackers are going to be pretty clear. Hopefully we can get through linebacker and defensive backs in the next episode. 10 guys there, though. We still have another 15 on the defense, and then 4 special team. We're going to do a return man too, actually. That might be a little bit more interesting than you think it is because there's a few guys there. But so maybe we'll have to do most of the defense next episode. Anyway, let me know where I went wrong. Let me know who I missed on, and where would you stack this defensive line up? I think it's pretty deep. You'd like one more centerpiece player, cornerstone player. Maybe that is just Trey Hendrickson. Maybe Hendrickson, remind you that they just need to pay this dude because he's one of the best defensive players you've ever had, one of the most accomplished, one of the most productive, no doubt one of the most productive players you've ever had on the defensive side. Not in the last 25 years. Long time. We'll hit the linebackers for sure. Maybe do the linebackers and corners on the next episode of Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. Until next time, Hooday.
Bengals fans, tired of the same old post-game chatter? Want real insight beyond the scoreboard? Then you need Bengals on the Brain with Joe Goodberry, presented by First Star Logistics. Joe Goodberry isn't just a fan, he's a die-hard Bengals football analyst. Every week, Joe dives deep into the Bengals game film, breaking down the plays that mattered, revealing hidden strategies, and uncovering the true impact of individual performances. Get ready for post-game analysis like you've never heard before, player evaluations that go beyond the stats, and the most in-depth Bengals draft coverage on the internet. Don't just watch the Bengals, understand the Bengals. Subscribe to Bengals on the Brain with Joe Goodberry on the First Star Media Group's YouTube channel. Get smart, get obsessed, get Bengals on the Brain.